Good morning, everyone. I wanted to come in and just share with you, I'm from the Midwest. I'm from tornado country. And I go back being a city manager in the times when there really wasn't warnings, adequate warnings. And here, the way that things are set up, thanks to this gentleman and the people that he works with, we have adequate warnings. So please, please pay attention to this training. Be very conscientious in everything that you're listening to and working on as a result of today. Because with that, never forget that you could be the one to save someone's life. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Okay, just to go over the agenda real briefly, we had opening remarks from Greg, which I really appreciate because every ship needs the captain, and we need that leadership from the commission and the mayor, so I greatly appreciate him coming in to say a few words. I'm going to say a few words just about our overall structure and how we operate, followed by Eddie Beecher, who will be discussing the emergency closure policy. And property schedule and our daily activity logs, which we heard so much about after Hurricane Matthew. We'll be moving also to Sandra King, who will be discussing our emergency notification system and some tests that we have coming up in the very near future. And our disaster cost recovery. We hear a lot about that. And Andrew Jean-Pierre and Valerie, Philipp will be presenting on that. Now, just keep in mind, this is not, it's a lot of information. We have a short amount of time. So I'm going to actually ask for the questions to be held to the end because we just have a very packed agenda. So moving along after that, we'll hear from Rob, which the season outlook, and a lot of the new products, which I do believe you will find very interesting and valuable for us to be using. Okay, cast of characters, right? Pompano Beach Emergency Response Team. Every one of you play a role in that. This is during Hurricane Matthew when we activated the EOC to a level 1. It was a very close call, as you all know, but I have to say I was very impressed with how prepared everyone came to the EOC. You were all prepared, and it's not the most comfortable of situations, and we went into our lockdown and made the best of it. I think it was a good learning opportunity for us, and it was a good drill for us. Some more cast of characters. What do you do during that time when you're waiting for the storm and the winds to come? All right, we're ready. Everybody's kind of going into lockdown. What next? So obviously coffee's a important thing. Many of you wanted to jump out the window, but because our hurricane-proof windows. But I really appreciate the teamwork and the camaraderie that you all shared because I think we got a lot out of this. It was a great, real drill. Instead of just practicing an exercise, this could happen, this might not happen, we're able to see, this is the category 4 or 5 large category storm that we were talking about, preparing for the last few years since our last set of hurricanes. But those of you who know me know I like to preach that it is not just about hurricanes. We have many other things that we need to consider in our planning. So when everyone is doing their emergency plans, please consider many of the other factors that you could have to prepare for, natural or man-made events. And it's a different environment now. And I know that a lot of the planning, fortunately, that we do for hurricanes can cross multiple types of incidents, natural or man-made. So your department plans are important. Obviously, before an event happens, the disaster or an incident where our resources, either labor for employees or equipment, are overwhelmed, we're hoping that now all the actions that we take as a city and as part of the emergency response team, which I know filters down to all of your teams. We have about 1,000 people. Everyone plays a part in the emergency response team for the city, preparedness, etc. And preparedness, that's what we do now. That's what we do when you hear me talk about NIMS, the National Incident Command System, and we need to have this training. Yes, it's important for grant compliance and things that we need to do, but it also helps us organize. It helps us organize and know what to anticipate and train for that together with our teams, the people that we see every day, and our partners. We have many partners. Rob Molleda is here from the National Weather Service. Valerie's here from Witt-O'Brien, Valerie Philipp. It's partnering. I know that extends out to all of our contractors and vendors. So having that team play. Mitigation, you've heard a lot about that. We have 2 plans that are overarching plans. One is the local mitigation strategy. That kind of says, all right, here's our threats and hazards, and what are our conditions? What does the county look like as a whole? That's something we go through every 5 years and update that plan. Under preparedness, it's our comprehensive emergency operations plan. All of you are part of that plan. Every department has a role and responsibility in that plan, and it's practicing that. So when we do respond to save as many lives as possible and protect as much property as possible, we're responding with the best capabilities that we know how and that we have available to us. Recovery, that's what we move into. That can oftentimes take a very long time, and it's very important for recovery, the economic stability of the city. It's really important to us that we get back to normal as fast as possible. And so year-round, right? What do? We always say, oh, we haven't had a hurricane in a few years. What are we doing? This is what we're doing. The preparedness cycle that does not stop. It's ongoing. And I know you all are very familiar with it. Planning, we do that every day. And those are, once we have our comprehensive emergency plan, that filters down to the departments and their emergency plans. So that's all of you. And then what do? We're organizing based on that. So that you see the EOC schedule come up. We're coming up with a schedule. Who are we going to put in place? Who are our primary shift people? Who are the alternates? And do we have their emergency contact information? Do they know what their role is? Will they be available? And who are their backups? It's really important. So we do that. Is there any other equipment we need to have? And if we don't have it and own it, who do we go to get it in the nick of time when we need it most? And are we fighting for resources with other jurisdictions? And how do we manage that to make sure that Pompano is safe and ready? Training, obviously we do that year-round. That's where the mini exercises, sometimes we'll all be together in one room trying to exercise a plan, which was pretty much Hurricane Matthew. But oftentimes now we break out into smaller groups, and based on lessons learned from Matthew, we're able to now continue that improvement. So exercise, which was Matthew, it was a great real drill for us, and then evaluate and improve, and that's where we are now. So you'll hear messages of things that we're just trying to improve, make better, and keep going with improving our process. Upcoming dates, I just want you to keep in mind, because you'll be seeing emails come out from me or other department heads about different events. We're doing a public emergency notification test. Okay, that is our emergency notification system, where we're going to make a phone call out to the entire public. And Sandra's going to speak a little bit about that today, so you'll hear that. That's June 7th. June 29th, we have an EOC exercise. I know, Paula, you had mentioned participating in that. We will not have everybody all at one time participating in this exercise, but it's going to be a focus group number of people so that we can exercise and meet the objectives of the exercise, which really is going to be mass care sheltering. So Parks and Rec, wherever you are, you'll be involved. July, we plan on doing a disaster cost recovery workshop. This is the dreaded documentation piece. Okay, whether it's electronic or you write it on a napkin, this is how we will meet those needs so that we get the full reimbursement that we can, if possible. Obviously, we have emergency funds, but when you really get hit by a larger disaster, it's very difficult to maintain your financial wellness. So that's really important to the city, that we know exactly what we need to do in that area. Okay, and next we will move to Ed Beecher, our HR director, to discuss human resources risk management, this portion of it.
Thank you, Kimberly. Well, I grew up here in South Florida, and I remember my parents allowing me to actually, and my older brothers and my sister, to actually go out in the eye of a storm because the kids had been in the house for hours, and now we could get out to go out in the eye of a storm and play in the eye of a hurricane storm. Hopefully you don't allow your children to do the same thing, right? We don't want to do that. My first hurricane, so I'm celebrating 40 years in government. I've worked in government pretty much in high school, started my career in high school, went to college. So as I celebrate my 40 years, I think back and I recall that my first storm was Hurricane David. And what was really interesting about that particular storm that was, it created on August 25th of 1979. And as the hurricane forecasters and folks were preparing the South Florida area for a storm, they were kind of taunting it, if you will, as being prepared for the Labor Day weekend storm. And they started this whole advertising campaign of being prepared for the storm. And they were doing it over a Labor Day weekend storm. And they started this advertisement, if you will, or public service announcement in the August timeframe. And wouldn't you believe that here on August 25th, the storm is formed, and it is coming toward us in South Florida on Labor Day weekend, right? Crazy, crazy time back then. The storm ends up kind of like Hurricane Matthew, going up the coast and going into the Savannah area. A lot of devastation and flooding in the Savannah area, and we were saved down here in South Florida. Been through Hurricane Andrew, Hurricane Wilma, and I remember working on when Hurricane Katrina was coming across the South Florida area, and my mayor at the time, when I was in the city of Hialeah, we used to say that he actually was a meteorologist, because he could predict where storms were going, and Hialeah was going to be okay, and we needed to continue to work. Because you know what happens when the storm is off the coast and the newscasters are saying, now's the time to prepare your home, and our mayor wasn't allowing people to go home. So we started getting all the calls in HR, when are we going to close? And the only thing I could say was, the mayor says the storm's not going to hit Hialeah, you know, because we need to continue to work until the mayor tells us to go home. So you get a lot of that. And so I understand his process, and his thinking was, just because the county has to initiate certain activities doesn't mean that we have to follow along with that exact plan. They have the shelters, they have bus routes, they have to do a number of staging and setup prior to the storm. That is their hurricane plan. Certainly we take our lead from the county, but we act independently. We get their advice, but we act based on when the city manager says that he's going to close the building, close operations. We follow our emergency manager and the city manager. So one of the things that we have is an emergency closure policy. It is on the S drive, and we put this out. This was adopted back in 2008. It is still the same policy that we had since 2008. It has not been amended. There are some discussions currently going on with our general employees. So there will probably be some amendments to this policy over the summer. But currently, as it is written and as it is published, this is our policy. It's interesting because Kimberly showed you the picture of the cast of characters, and I was serving Cuban coffee. We were all pretty tired at that point when we were drinking some Cuban coffee to stay awake. We'd been there for, I guess, close to 12 hours. Close to it, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, cast of characters, is that what you're going to show? Yeah. Yeah. There you go. Cuban coffee. But the point I was trying to make is that we did get a number of calls from employees saying, you know, when do I come to work? Where do I come to work? And you will get those. You will get those phone calls. We like to say everyone is essential. So clerical folks, secretarial folks, you are essential personnel. We have chosen a career of public service. So when a disaster hits and there is a major emergency in our town, we need to be prepared for it. Everyone needs to follow the instructions on, reporting to work. If your office is closed, then you're going to come to this facility and Human Resources will direct you on where you need to go and work. And you all will get questions and you will all get the scenarios. I have children at home, the schools are closed, the daycares are closed, I have no one to watch the kids, I have no one to let the dogs out. Those are the kinds of things that our employees need to be thinking about and addressing now. And certainly we will look at each case on a case-by-case basis under those emergency situations. But folks need to understand that they are considered essential personnel and they are expected to report when the all clear is given. Folks say, well, I'm a part-time employee. That doesn't mean that we're not going to have work for you. Temporary employees, we will have work for you. And it's a tough thing. Let me tell you, you're at home with your family and you've secured your home. My wife looked at me and said, you're going into the EOC and I'm going to be here at the house by myself. But she understands that she's in public service as well. That's what we signed up for. I signed up for it 40 years ago. Let's move along. You had on the back table, we were handing out our emergency contact list. So make sure, I'm going to put the papers down. Make sure you fill out your emergency contact list. Why do we have it on a paper form? We actually physically carry the paper forms with us over to the EOC in case the electronic forms are not available. All right, so we would ask that all of our employees complete an update, and you would be surprised at the information that has changed since last year, with phone numbers and addresses. We'd like all of our employees to update their emergency contact information. Kimberly touched on it a little bit, but I'm going to try and reinforce it, and that is the daily activity log. So FEMA will not reimburse the city for normal activities. But if you're doing storm preparation or recovery, and those activities are directly related to the storm and not your normal activities, we are eligible for reimbursement as it currently stands. We like to say that because FEMA could change their mind on that. But as it currently stands, so depending on those activities, we are eligible for reimbursement. And that's why it's really important that you complete those daily activity forms. When do you think the best time to complete your activity sheet is? And it would be at the time that you do the work. Because when you have to go back and recreate and think about what you were doing at a particular time, especially in a disaster or in a emergency situation, you may forget what you were actually working on. And we want to try and recover as much as we possibly can. So, keyword, we're all essential personnel, right? We're all essential. This is also a good time for department heads, and I work with, and Cindy works with department heads. We work with the department heads frequently, but it's, several of us are reminded that we have we purchase insurance on our properties. It is critically important that we have our properties on our schedule. So while we work closely with department heads to make sure this is updated, any renovations to the facility, any updates to the facility, everyone can see this, right? No, just joking. Everyone's so serious. So it's important, and the reason why it is important is that if we have insurance and we put in an insurance claim and we try and seek reimbursement through FEMA as well, FEMA will say, what did insurance pay? And if we show them that we have neglected to put a property down on our schedule, FEMA will say, well, you made the mistake. You should have had the property on your schedule. Therefore, it's non-eligible. You should have had coverage on it. So we have what is called a scheduled property schedule. So we need to make sure that our fire stations are listed, the renovations to the fire stations are there, our parks are listed, and property is actually updated on the schedule. All right? Just keep that in mind as you're working on these projects and you're adding a project. A simple phone call to risk management to say, you know, did we make sure to tell you that we did a renovation at this community center? We updated, we put some major equipment. Gene and I worked on a project one time where he had updated with several $100,000 in electronic equipment for phone equipment. And we added that to the building. The building was covered for $50,000, but we had inside the building several $100,000 in actual equipment. We needed to update it. What else am I talking about? Did I cover it all?
I think you did.
I did. We're going to hold questions till the very end.
Great, thank you, Ed.
You're welcome.
As he throws paper on me, he says, no, you saw it.
You saw it all, right?
Exactly. We've captured this. No, thank you, Ed. Very important messages. Equally as important now is emergency notification, how we contact or reach out to the public and what that notification is. And Sandra King will be discussing that. Sandra King, our Public Communications Director. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. Before, during, and after a storm, in any emergency, one of the most important things we need to do is to communicate to our public and to communicate to our employees what we're doing, how we're doing it, where they can get water, what is open, what is closed, what to do, how we're handling garbage pickup, everything people are very, very concerned about. We have to get the word out to them. And so how we do this in our case is through an emergency notification system we use. It's called Code Red, and what it involves is telephoning every single resident in the city with a message. And that message will usually come from either myself or the mayor. And before a storm, it will be notifying people that a storm is approaching and this is what's happening, this is what you need to do. We'll also call during a storm, and we'll call after the storm to let them know. In the past, these records, these phone records, were all landlines, and they were easy to obtain. You cross through the phone book and you cross through things like that. Well, it's getting more and more difficult as people are now gravitating towards cell phones and away from landlines. Our numbers in our Code Red system are going down and down and down, and that's really scary because we need to notify people of what's happening. On June 7th, we're going to be conducting what's called an all-call. And what we're doing is this time you're going to utilize our records by cross-referencing all of our water customers. When people sign up for water, they sign up with their name, their address, their phone number, their cell phone, and their email. And so we've not only gone through our customer service department, we've also gone through Broward County to obtain all the records of the water customers up in the Highlands, Crest Haven, and 2 other pockets that are Broward water customers. And we're going to put all of that data into the Code Red system, and we're going to conduct an all-call to every single one of those people on June 7th. And that's to number one, let people know there is a system, an emergency notification system in place. So if I get it, my neighbor doesn't get it, then it starts people talking. Did you get that message that said, well, no, I didn't get it? On that message, we're going to tell people this is how you sign up. And so if you didn't get a call or you know someone who didn't get a call, register all your cell phone numbers. You can register family members. You can register somebody out of town if you wanted to, if you want to get City of Pompano Beach emergency notification system messages. Because we're utilizing this database, we're going to be expecting there's going to be people who maybe don't need to get the message, or maybe they're a water customer but they don't live in the city. So Kimberly, the emergency manager, has arranged for CERT volunteers to man the EOC on June 7th when we make that all call. On the all call, we'll be saying, if you have any questions, you can call this phone number. That phone number is going to go back into the EOC, where Kimberly is going to have volunteers manning the phones, because we anticipate there's going to be a lot of calls. And so if anybody here gets a call in City Hall, we'll be putting that phone number out that we want people to call, which will go into the EOC to answer any of those questions. We do this for a few reasons, and that's to get everybody thinking about being on the emergency notification system, and to also weed out what should and shouldn't be in the system. Something new that they've added recently in recent years is the ability to have texting and email. So when we put this message into the system, I also type it up in 30 words or less, and then in 10 words or less, and that gets texted to anybody or emailed who signed up with those notifications as well. So that's something new, and we're going to be testing that service. Lastly, as far as employees and the public, we put all of the information we want out on the city's website, pompanobeachfl.gov. We want the public going there for their information. We're not going to put anything out on Facebook. We're not going to tweet anything. We want people going to one location. We've worked with the CRA and other departments. They're not going to post anything. We want one consistent message going out, and that will be on the city's website. Our webmaster is going to be on call during a storm or in the EOC. So if any messages need to go out, it'll be on the website. On the website, we're also going to give people a place to sign up for the emergency notification system. Same with that. In that emergency notification system, there's other categories. One of those categories is employees. And so if we need to call up employees, if we needed to, we'll utilize the Code Red emergency notification system to put a message out to you all that you've signed up with by signing up on that emergency sheet that you have here that was handed out. So many different ways. So this is what we're doing, and on June 7th will be the test all call. And if anybody has any questions, by all means, let me know, and I'll be glad to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. You can see how that all comes together. I know sometimes there's been confusion of which list, the public list, and then we have our internal city lists. And that's why I bug everybody for their emergency contact information. And if you can give me multiple numbers, that's great, because we put them on a separate database. And that really helps us to stay in touch with you. Next, we'll be discussing disaster cost recovery, which obviously we heard a lot about. Hurricane Matthew is a really good example. The county was declared a disaster. We have a disaster declaration from the governor, from the president. What that means is federal funds and the possibility for reimbursement. Now, obviously, we don't get 100% back. And while we did not have a lot of damage, we had some damage. So it's really important to capture that. That was also a great exercise for us, and that's why I've asked Andrew to speak a little bit about this, because it's really an important component. And even in these, close calls, it's really important to make sure that we're doing the documentation. So Andrew is our new finance director. He just was recently promoted. So Andrew, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. As you know, finance, we're responsible for the finance reimbursement process. We work closely with FEMA. We work with you guys to get all the data necessary to support what we're providing to FEMA. For Hurricane Wilma, just to put things in perspective, for Hurricane Wilma, we spent about $10 million. For Hurricane Matthew, right now we estimate about $65,000. It's not a lot of money compared to what it could have been, but we are taking the opportunity. We're going through the process. We're treating it like if it was a major hurricane, and we're looking at a process, seeing where we can improve. One of the things we've identified during our previous workshops is the activity logs and the need to, identify who, what, when, and where. And for the most part, I think we're doing a pretty good job getting that information in. We're not at 100% compliance. We did identify a few gaps that we're hoping to fill in. When we have our workshop next month, we're going to get into more detail on what we need going forward. Another thing we're going to be discussing next month at the workshop, I think Ed mentioned, is the emergency closure policy. I know there was some confusion on, some people got sent home, but then some people had to go to work, and getting the time filled in, and there was some confusion there, basically. So that hopefully we'll have an answer. I know they're working on the labor contract right now, so maybe we'll have some clarification there. Timesheet codes is another very, very important area. Joan will be working closely with the timekeepers during the workshop to make sure that information is being put in correctly. Basically, that drives, we're able to identify if anyone forgot to submit their activity log for whatever reason. If it's coded correctly, we can identify, we go through a reconciliation process, and we'll be able to come back to you and say, we're missing that timesheet. But it's very important to get that code in correctly, because then we can go ahead and catch it on the back end. We will be putting a little more emphasis on the timekeepers to identify the missing activity logs before it gets to us. What happens is, in the case of Hurricane Matthew, it took finance a while before we start the reconciliation process, so we would go back to you, a week later, 2 weeks later, a month later. And I know sometimes it could be hard to remember what exactly you were doing. So we're going to try to catch those on the front end. Insurance is another item. I think Ed briefly touched upon it. It's very important that we identify any property that's damaged during a hurricane. And we're going to encourage, from what we've seen, we're encouraging for the workshop crew leaders, supervisors, managers, anyone that's really going to be involved with the process to attend the workshop. It's very important. We feel that Matthew could have been much worse, and we want to take the opportunity to address any gaps. Next will be Valerie Phillips, and she's going to talk more about the disaster recovery process.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Valerie Philipp, and I work with a company called Witt-O'Brien's, and we've been employed by the city to help with the disaster recovery process and to provide that guidance on the FEMA program and any other grant opportunities that may become available. So I think it's really great that you guys have come here. I see a lot of familiar faces from our annual cost recovery training, and I think it's good that the city takes the opportunity to get everyone in the same place to talk about processes, policies, and procedures so that you're more aware of what you need to do, when you need to do it, and how we can better streamline this process. I don't want to get into the weeds today because you guys will see me in a month, and we're going to talk details and documentation. I think it's been mentioned a couple of times already that this is not a short process for recovery from the financial perspective when you go through the federal grant process, but it is nonetheless a very important one, even for a small event like Matthew, because every dollar makes a difference with that emergency fund, and to make sure that you're able to get as much of that return as possible. So just from a perspective, Matthew happened in October of last year. We're just completing submittal of the documentation for debris removal efforts. It was not a lot of that $65,000, but we just finished that yesterday. And so FEMA has that information, and now we've got to finish the rest of the emergency protective measures, preparing for the storm and getting back to normal operations afterward. So it's really important that an exercise like we just went through, we're able to share that information with you guys and to provide additional detail at the coming training in July so that we can help you streamline
the process, because you need to make sure that you complete the daily activity forms, complete the payroll and the pay code entry, and make sure those damages get assessed if there's any property damage from a larger type of event, so that all that information can be compiled, reviewed, make sure that you get it all in one place at one time while it's fresh on everyone's mind, so that we can keep that recovery process flowing, especially when there's a declaration. So we appreciate you guys' time and effort to come today and again in a month, and we'll get into all that detail again then and give you guys some more guidance and information to help streamline everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. Valerie's been a partner of ours for a couple of years now, and she's very smart girl. And we noticed, Valerie's been so key in our planning process, because it's a full-time job to even stay on top of the FEMA rules, what FEMA's doing in the state, and trying to really glean those changes that really make a big difference in the end. We even had a surprise this season about workbooks, and you should fill out the, just additional paperwork. So it's constantly changing what our purchasing rules are and how we get our, contracts, et cetera. A lot of that information is really important. Andrew touched on a number of things of what we learned from Matthew. It was a great drill. It was a great incident where we didn't have a lot of damage, and we were actually able to focus on, okay, what can we improve here? And really, that's that reconciliation that needs to be done at the department level prior to it getting to finance. So you'll hear more about that in July. But we've been reaching out to a lot of the departments already and just kind of trying to tweak our process, what we had, and that's, that'll be, you'll see more about that. Next, we have a excellent speaker who is a subject matter expert in weather, which I know you all love. That's how I really actually got all these people here, really. It's to see you, and I know that. Rob Molleda, he's also a friend of mine, and I've known him for a number of years. They are a tremendous partner to us. While again, we're talking about Hurricane Kickoff, they were also instrumental with our ship sinking. We held weather briefings to make sure that things were going well. There's different partners doing that, but they were a huge partner of ours to help Greg Harrison out with that as a subject matter expert in the area. So Rob's from the National Weather Service, so he worked with the Hurricane Service and Center, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that, of how that's all connected. Is it the Hurricane Center? Is it NOAA? And how does National Weather Service fit in as a partner to the city? So I'll invite Rob Molleda to come up now. And he says he's just a warning coordination meteorologist. I believe he's really the senior and has a large team. So let's welcome him. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you. Thank you.
And let's test that out too.
Testing. Can you hear me okay? Again, it sounds like it's projecting.
Okay. Excellent. And also, if you came in late and did not sign in, please make sure that you do that before you leave today. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Kimberly, the city of Pompano Beach, for having me here. It's great to see. It's great to be part of these meetings and these discussions, because really it's we all have an involvement, obviously, in hurricane and weather. Really, as Kimberly mentioned in her presentation, it's not just hurricanes; it's all hazards. Not just as part of our not just as part of our duties and responsibilities of our job, but also as individuals, as families. So that's we're part of the puzzle, and we're happy to really help to help the city, really help all the residents of Pompano Beach and all of South Florida. I'll go ahead and talk. Before I start the presentation, Kimberly mentioned how my office and my office fits in the Weather Service scheme, if you will. And I am the warning coordination meteorologist. The National Weather Service, as a whole, we have 122 local offices nationwide. So that means that we have a local presence really all across the country. So we're not, all the forecasts and information that you see, all the weather information from the Weather Service doesn't come from one location. It comes from local offices scattered all across the country with a staff of meteorologists, and that's what we do 24/7. And it's literally, we are a 24/7 operation. We're there all the time. not the same person, obviously, but we're rotating shift workers. So, and as warning coordination meteorologist, one of my main roles is to be the liaison to all of our communities here in South Florida, the area that we serve, or the areas that we serve. So I'm the one that deals primarily with with Kimberly, and for I don't know, about 10 years. I think more than 10 years now. I've been in my position for 11 years, almost 11 years. So I think almost all those 11 years, we've worked together. So it's great to work with Kimberly, and she's solid. So anyway, so the way that in National Weather Service, in addition to the local offices, we also have several national level centers. And one of those national level centers is the National Hurricane Center. So we are part of the same agency, but you can kind of call it different branches of the same agency. National Hurricane Center, their responsibility is on a much larger scale. They kind of look at the big picture. So they monitor the tropics, the entire Atlantic Ocean from the west coast of Africa all the way to North America and everything in between. So their job is to monitor for any potential tropical development, and when systems form, their responsibility is to provide that forecast. They forecast the track of the storm for 5 days, out to 5 days, as well as the intensity of the storm out to 5 days. So based on that information, based on their expertise as tropical meteorologists, then the local offices take that information and we bring it down to the local level. So when we provide information to Kimberly and to all of you and to all the communities here in South Florida when a storm threatens, it's taking that information from the Hurricane Center and trying to localize it as much as possible so we can really get down to the details as far as, for example, when we expect the winds to begin, when we expect all those hazardous conditions to begin, which helps, of course, with planning. It's that timeline, that things have to be done by a certain time. Well, that time, that deadline, if you will, is largely determined, or is determined by when we expect the hazardous conditions to arrive. So that's a lot of what we do is we take that information and in the briefings that we provide, try to help as much as possible to inform our residents and our citizens of what they could expect. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the tools that we use to help come up with that information. In other words, we don't just come up with it out of thin air. There's actually a lot of science and a lot of technical things involved. But really, the important thing is to boil it down so people can understand. People can understand it. We're not expecting everyone to be scientists here. Our responsibility is to communicate, not just forecast the weather accurately, which of course is our main job, but also to communicate effectively. Without effective communication, really the best forecast will probably not be interpreted or used correctly. So anyway, that's one of the main themes that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to start off, though. This is actually, a bit of, I guess, good news. Usually when meteorologists come to speak about something, it's usually about bad weather or something bad that could happen or has happened. Well, I'm going to talk at least a little bit at the beginning about something good. And this is it's an initiative that's called Weather Radiation Ambassador. This is something Weather Service started about 2 years ago, maybe a little over 2 years ago. And it's, as the slides here show, it's the overarching theme of it is building community resilience in the face of increasing vulnerability to extreme events or extreme weather and hazardous events in water and really any weather-related event. Okay, so really this Weather Radiation Ambassador initiative is open to anyone. It's open to cities, counties, businesses, civic organizations, business organizations, any group that has an interest in becoming what that second slide shows as a force multiplier. In other words, about promoting weather awareness, promoting weather safety. That's really what this is. It doesn't really. It's not like a test, where anyone who's interested, we put them. They have to answer certain questions and they have to get them all right. No, it's really. They go. It's a website. It's just like a one-page form. They just read it over so they can get an understanding of what's expected of them, what the program's about, and they sign up, and that's it. So we have a wall at our office. By the way, our office, the Miami forecast office, which serves South Florida, is co-located with the Hurricane Center. So I would consider that a little bit of an advantage that we're co-located with the Hurricane Center, in the sense that if we do when we do that direct coordination, when we have hurricanes threatening South Florida, we don't just pick up a phone and just talk to, hear a voice on the other end. We actually know when we work with these people, and then we're in the same building with them. So I think that's a little bit of an added advantage, I think, that we have here in South Florida compared to other parts of the country. But anyway, I digress. This is on our main hallway, we have a wall, and about 2 months ago, we built this. And so you see the poster in the middle, and then around it, you see all these little symbols, all these little weather symbols, tornadoes, clouds, raindrops. And those all represent each of our weather radiation ambassadors that have signed up in our roster, if you will. Well, in that top left corner of that wall is Pompano Beach Fire Rescue. So I wanted to point that out. I know it's a little kind of cute, little tornadoes. I chose a tornado. Well, actually, no. The reason I didn't choose the tornado for Pompano Beach specifically, tornado is the symbol that I chose for all cities and counties. In other words, like government agencies, if you will, whether it's a local, city, state level. And of course, as we know, tornadoes are no strangers to Pompano Beach. Believe me, I know where I'm at. And it was back in February of 2016 with January and February, we had 2 tornadoes touch down, at least, or affect parts of the city. So, Kimberly mentioned at the beginning, certainly makes sense when you think about that. It's not just hurricanes that affect us. We do get hit by other types of weather. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out. And we're very, very happy that Pompano Beach is a weather ready nation ambassador. And I think I think this is it's a formal way of recognizing what you've already been doing for a long, long time. So it's a nice recognition. So, all right. So now we get to the bad news. Okay. Now this is not the hurricane forecast for this year. Okay, so you want to get that out, get that out of the way. What this is you can consider it our hurricane history. That gray circle is the center of it is Fort Lauderdale, so it applies to Pompano Beach, pretty much the same, and it's a 65-mile radius circle. So all those lines are the center, or basically the hurricane tracks. In other words, where the center of the storm is tracked. Somewhere within that circle since 1865. So there have been 42 hurricanes since 1865 that have tracked over that circle with a 65-mile radius centered on Fort Lauderdale. So what that shows is that we are a hurricane-prone area. History has shown us that. We've been rather fortunate, really, over the last several decades. I'm going to show another slide here in a moment that will illustrate that. So again, we have to be ready every year, regardless of what the seasonal outlook is going to show here. And I'm going to show it here now because everyone obviously is interested in it. But I do want to also make an important point after this slide here. So it was just released last week, so actually not even a week ago. And we're forecasting, or at least the outlook is, for anywhere from 11 to 17 named storms to form between June 1 and November 30th. 5 to 9 of those hurricanes, and of those 5 to 9 hurricanes, 2 to 4 major hurricanes. So those numbers reflect slightly above normal, numbers for an average hurricane season. And the pie chart on the left breaks it down by what are the chances of being above normal, below normal, or near normal. So the 45% means that there's a 45% chance, based on these numbers, that we're going to end up with an above normal number of storms, with a 35% chance of near normal and 20% below normal. So, those aren't very high probabilities of either of the categories, of either, any of those three. Okay. Let's see if this works. So this is the big caveat to this. That outlook is not an indicator of expected or even possible local activity. That's really what we care about. In the end is whether we are going to be affected or not here in Pompano Beach and in Broward County and in South Florida in general. Those outlooks are only intended to be used as a general indicator, a very broad indicator of how many storms might form overall between that June 1 and November 30th season. We have no skill, meteorologists have no skill in predicting before the season starts what areas have the best chance of being hit in a given year. We just don't have that skill to forecast the weather patterns that really can really be, I would say we will probably have about 10 days worth of accuracy, if you will, in forecasting those weather patterns or the weather systems that then really dictate or determine which way the storms are going to go and how strong it might get. We don't have that skill 3, 4 months, 2 months, or even 1 month in advance. So when you see these numbers, keep in mind that this is not a reflection of what we should be preparing. In other words, we shouldn't let this outlook dictate how we should prepare. Bottom line is we should prepare the same way every year because we need to remember really ultimately our history. You know, a lot of these hurricanes hit us in years where there were active storm, or it was an active season. Some of those hurricanes hit in years when we had inactive years and in average years. There's, you know, we have a little bit of everything. 25 years ago, 1992, we were hit by, well, these parts of South Florida were hit by Hurricane Andrew. That 1992 hurricane season was one of the least active on record. It only had 7 named storms that entire year, but one of them was Hurricane Andrew. So it's, you know, the old cliche that you'll hear over and over again, it only takes one. Well, it really only takes one. And, you know, we don't know which of those, if any of those, are going to hit South Florida. So we have to be ready. That's really the overarching message here. And yes, here are the list of names for this hurricane, for really the next several years. And the third list there is the 2017 list of names. We've already gone through one. We had kind of a rare, you know, middle of the ocean storm, Arlene, back in April. It wasn't really of minor consequence. It didn't affect any land areas, just affected shipping, of course, out in the North Atlantic. So the next storm we get will actually be the B storm, whenever that decides to form, which will be Brett. Now, what this map shows, these maps show typical hurricane formation by month, not what's expected, not what's possible, kind of an average of what we've seen in the past. So you see the first two, June and July, there are, excuse me, you don't see a lot of activity there. Those, you know, kind of, you know, lower, relatively quiet months, at least as far as development is concerned. And whatever does form during those months can form relatively close to Florida. We don't get a lot of those storms that form out in the deep eastern Atlantic until really later in the hurricane season. So once you get to August, September, and October, that's when we get the storms form way, way out there off the coast of Africa and then start to make their march westward, gradually approaching our part of the world. So it's really the months of August, September, and October when we are more, I should say, when the tropics become much more active. That's when all the conditions in the atmosphere become more conducive. They all kind of come together, which is warm water. The waters are warmest during those 3 months in the tropics. There's more moisture in the atmosphere, so clouds can form and thunderstorms can form. And also the winds in the top levels of the atmosphere tend to be lighter. So when those conditions come together, which they do frequently during those 3 months, that's when most of our hurricane activity starts occurring. And those lines show that the typical tracks, not all the tracks, those aren't the tracks hurricanes are going to take. They could take many different tracks, but those are the more typical ones. And many of those, as you see there, bring our storms at least close to our area and sometimes directly over us. Even into October, and especially into October, we can still remain quite vulnerable to hurricanes. Matthew last year occurred in October, and the last hurricane strike was Hurricane Wilma in 2005. That was also in October. So the season isn't over once you go past September. And that's what this is. What I'm trying to illustrate here is that although the peak of hurricane season from an Atlantic-wide level is September 10th, that's the date in which, on average, we tend to have the most number of storms out there. That doesn't mean that our threat begins to diminish once we pass September 10th. In fact, most of the hurricanes that have hit South Florida have occurred, those landfalls have occurred after September 10th. So I think maybe I've already given away this answer here, but I'm going to just kind of throw it out here for everyone. In what month has most of our hurricanes hit in South Florida? So who thinks the answer is A, August? Anyone by show of hands? Okay, how about October? Oh, I just gave away the answer. Sorry, I pressed the button too fast. I think you got it. I think you figured it out. October is actually the month in which we've been hit the most historically. September comes pretty close to second. So I'm not saying, hey, October is the only month you have to pay attention. No, certainly August, September, and October by far, I think all but two hurricanes, all but two have hit South Florida during those 3 months. So, we need to be ready throughout the season. That doesn't mean June and July we're fine, because even these tropical storms that can affect us early in the season can still do a lot of damage. So we have to pay attention year-round or season-wide. But the hurricanes, the ones that have the greatest potential for impact and damage, they're mainly concentrated during that 3-month period. Now, I mentioned earlier that we've been pretty fortunate over the last, really, several decades that we haven't really had a lot of big hurricane impacts here in South Florida. And this slide here, I think, illustrates that. The map on the left shows all of the major hurricane landfalls from 1920 to 1965. When I say major hurricane, what we're referring to is hurricanes of Category 3 or higher. So Cat 3s, 4s, and 5s, directly hitting or making landfall somewhere in the southern part of Florida. And the numbers there correspond to the years. So those are years of when those hurricanes made landfall. You can see 15 of them from 1920 to 1965. Now, not all of those were direct impacts on Broward County, but a lot of those were. And in fact, all of those were probably at least some kind of impact, maybe even indirectly. But I mean, that's amazing to consider how many major hurricanes hit Florida, just an incredibly active period. You compare that to the more recent period, and actually you can take that all the way to the current time. Since 1966, we've only had 4 major hurricanes make landfall in southern Florida. You see the 05 one is Wilma. 04 is Charlie on the west coast and Jean on the east coast. And 1992, of course, was Hurricane Andrew, which we mentioned previously. So we've been very fortunate, but how long is this going to last? We can't guarantee that this trend is going to continue. We are an area that we have been impacted by major hurricanes many times in the past, and it will happen again someday. We just hope that it's not, anytime soon, or that whenever it does happen, that we are, of course, that we're ready as a community and we take all the steps that we need to take. We've already talked about, heard about Hurricane Matthew. That was our last or most recent close call, if you will. And it certainly was our closest call since we got hit by Wilma 11 or almost 12 years ago, actually. So Hurricane Matthew definitely was a scare. It was a Category 3 hurricane just offshore. And this was one way of showing how close Matthew came, or how close we came to being really directly impacted by the really damaging part of the storm. That red swath running just east of South Florida, that's where we think the hurricane force winds occurred, the more sustained, steady hurricane force winds. So they were just offshore by maybe 30, 40 miles from Pompano Beach. They go across the Bahamas and then skirted the east coast of Florida, basically from the Treasure Space Coast northward. But really, Florida as a whole escaped the worst of the storm. So we were definitely very fortunate. Unfortunately, they weren't so fortunate over on the other side of the Gulf Stream and in the Bahamas. This is one picture from Freeport and Grand Bahama Island, and really there are many more pictures and video that show damage even worse than that. But they got the Category 3 wind, so they got the major hurricane over in the Bahamas, just on the other side of the Gulf Stream, not very far away from here. So, whenever we go through an event where, especially hurricane events where, hurricane warnings go up, we activate the EOC, we spend long hours looking at the latest information and worrying and doing everything that we need to do to get ready for storms, and then not a lot happens. There's always the concern, right? There's always, the question, well, did we cry wolf? Did we prepare unnecessarily for this? And hopefully, of course, the answer is, I like to think the answer is no, because there was a really good reason why we had to be ready for the storm, because it was a pretty close call. As I mentioned here, the center of Matthew, again, the center of that storm, not just, the storm, of course, is not just one point. It's a large area that can cover a couple hundred miles. But the center of it passed only 60 miles to the east of West Palm Beach. And the sustained hurricane force winds were probably only about 10 or 20 miles offshore of the Palm Beaches and not much farther offshore here in northern Broward County. So certainly, I think it was warranted that we had to put up hurricane warnings, given the fact that we have to put up the hurricane warning 36 hours in advance. We can't wait until we know exactly where the storm is going to go, how far it's going to be from us. We have to issue the warning 36 hours in advance so people can take time to prepare. Hurricanes are something that we need a lot of time to prepare for. It's not just something that'll affect one or two neighborhoods. It's going to affect the entire region. A lot of decisions are being made, even well before the warning is issued, as far as evacuations, when the infrastructure needs to be, shut down, or bridges, etc. I mean, just many different things. And I'm not an emergency manager, so I'm not going to get into all the details. But I think you understand what I'm talking about here. So when we make that decision to issue a warning, there's still quite a bit of uncertainty as far as exactly where that storm's going to go. We may have a pretty good idea, but a pretty good idea is not enough. There's still, all it takes is maybe 10 or 20, 30 miles of a difference in the track of the storm to totally change things. And that's something that's just too, we don't have that level of accuracy, for 10 or 20 miles, 36 hours in advance. Now, Matthew was a pretty, the way meteorologists like to call it, a well-behaved storm. In other words, it pretty much did what we thought it was going to do. There were no big surprises in the atmosphere. Once we locked in on this track across the Bahamas and then approaching the Florida coast, the forecast was really pretty accurate. When we look at it, from a historical perspective, considering the average errors in our forecast as we go farther out in time. And the famous spaghetti models on the left, which, in other words, that's the kind of the different opinions that we get from all the computer models out there, were pretty much pointing on the same direction. So we had a pretty high level of confidence that the storm was going to take a track to the northwest across the Bahamas and make a close approach to the southeast Florida coast. How close? That was the key. And it was too close for comfort. We could not go away without putting up a hurricane warning, given how close that storm came to our area. But fortunately, it did stay just offshore. So, as I mentioned, meteorologically, it was a good forecast. But it's very difficult to forecast local impacts for a storm that's paralleling the coast. It's not one of those storms that was making a direct, beeline towards the coastline. It was really kind of, just kind of paralleling or moving up the coast. So when those storms just vary, and Matthew would have shifted just slightly to the west, which would not have been impossible for it to do, our impacts would have been a lot worse. So we had to go with what we call, and I'm going to talk more about this later, the reasonable worst case scenario. Now, what exactly is a reasonable worst case scenario? Well, I'm going to talk about that more here in a little bit. So just kind of remember that term. All right, new products. Kimberly mentioned at the beginning that we have a lot of new information, products that are starting here in 2017 that we think are going to help people be better informed and prepare. In other words, have more information to help you prepare for any hurricane threats. Now, those of you, and it's probably most of you here, that like to use like to go to the Hurricane Center website and look at the track and cone graphic. That's the forecast that Hurricane Center puts out every 6 hours. Those graphics are going to look a little bit different. Just the kind of the colors are going to look different. It's going to have a little bit of a cleaner look. But the information is going to be generally going to be the same. One thing that we're going to have the option of doing this year is we're going to be able to, that's right, the laser pointer doesn't work on these monitors, but see that, you see the map on the top right, that yellow blob, that's the area of tropical storm force winds that's currently occurring, at least at the beginning of that forecast. That's where the area of tropical storm force winds is located. You're going to be able to toggle that on so you can see how that area compares to the cone. The famous cone, the cone of uncertainty, the cone of error, goes by different names. And the point we're trying to make here is that the winds or the impacts of a hurricane extend well beyond the cone. It's not that cone is not telling you exactly where the storm is going to be. In other words, the cone is not a reflection of where the bad weather, where the impacts are going to occur. The cone is just a purely statistical way of showing what the most likely area of where the center of the storm is going to more likely be. So in other words, that area has a 2 in 3 chance of the center of the storm tracking over, which of course means that there's a 1 in 3 chance, statistically, that the center of the storm could stray outside the cone. So the cone should not be used strictly as okay, if I'm in the cone, I'm in trouble. If I'm not in the cone, I'm in good shape. It's not quite the way it works. The cone is good to use, especially when you're far out, maybe 4 or 5 days out, perhaps, maybe 3 days. If you're in the cone or near the cone during that 3 to 5 day period, okay, then you certainly should be paying a lot more attention. And perhaps even at that point, you might be starting to take some initial actions. But once the storm gets closer to you, notice how the cone shrinks or gets narrower. The reason it does that is because our errors get lower and lower. In other words, our forecast tends to be more accurate the closer in time we get. So the cone is just a reflection of our error, our average error. The storm doesn't get smaller as it gets closer to us, as that graphic illustrates, and that's why we're putting that on the maps this year, so that you can get a sense that the storm's impacts go well beyond that cone. So again, don't focus too much on that cone. This is probably the biggest and most important change, or addition, I should say, to this year, is that we're going to start issuing, as needed, storm surge watches and storm surge warnings. Last year, for Matthew, we actually, on the Hurricane Center website, there were some graphics that we were putting up that illustrated where those warnings would have occurred. Although last year we did not issue any of these warnings. It's starting this year. But last year, we started to give people an idea, okay, this is where the area of the warning would look like if we were issuing it this year. Start getting people thinking about this new addition, or this addition to this hurricane season. So for Matthew, the warning did not extend down to Broward County, but it came down to Palm Beach County. So what exactly are we trying to say here with the watch and warning? Well, a storm surge warning means that there is a danger of life-threatening inundation generally within 36 hours. So when a warning is issued, similar to a hurricane warning means that there's a likelihood that hurricane conditions will occur somewhere in that warning area within 36 hours. Storm surge warning is really the same concept, the same idea, but for storm surge. And the storm surge watch means that there's a possibility of life-threatening inundation generally within 48 hours. Now, the evacuation decisions. So when the county decides to implement their or order evacuations, this is some of the information that they're going to be looking at. Again, this is not an evacuation map, per se. In other words, they're not going to use that and say, okay, just because we're in the purple area, we're going to issue evacuations. It's possible there are other considerations that come into play. But that's one of the main ways that we really are going to get the word out to the public to reinforce the message. If there are evacuation orders issued and you're under a warning, well, there's a good reason why. We're hoping that this really acts as a way to really motivate folks to take the storm surge threat seriously, because it is the most dangerous part of the storm. In fact, I think just storm surge alone accounts for half of all the deaths from hurricanes in the United States. And the other, like 30 or 40% comes from rainfall flooding. So the wind threat of the storm, although it's certainly very serious and does hurt and kill people, unfortunately, historically only accounts for about 7 to 8% of all deaths attributed to hurricanes, direct deaths. So the water kills much more than the wind does. And as a coastal community, we have to take that threat very seriously. There's another map, and this one's been around for a few years, and you'll see it also on the Hurricane Center's website. It's called Potential Storm Surge Flood Map. So you'll see a map that depicts the Fort Myers area, just kind of give you a sample of what it looks like. Now that map is not saying, or is not indicating all the areas that are going to get flooded. It's not saying, okay, that entire area will get that much flooding. What that's showing is that there's a potential that some of those areas are going to get the flooding that's depicted there. What this is showing is what we call a reasonable worst case scenario. So it really, you think of it this way, there's a 10% chance that those values that the map is showing are going to be exceeded, that it's going to be worse than that. So yes, it is a pretty conservative map, pretty conservative forecast, but we do have to consider, even for a relatively low probability occurrence, something on the something like a 7-8 foot storm surge, something like major hurricane force winds. Even low probabilities of those are important, are something that we need to take very seriously. It's not like saying, okay, we have a 20% chance of rain, okay, no big deal. But a 20% chance of a major hurricane or a 20% chance of life-threatening storm surge inundation, that's a different story. So we have to act on that, even if the probabilities seem relatively low, because there is at least a reasonable chance that it might occur. So it's really what we're doing is we're providing a responsible safety margin with this information. And I'll expand on that a bit more here as we go on. So this map here is really more for decision makers, emergency managers, people who have to make decisions as far as maybe evacuations or, to get an idea of what areas could be most severely affected for, recovery efforts afterwards, et cetera. But this is really what the public should be responding to, is that storm surge watch and warning that we talked about earlier. So this is what we really want the public to react to. I mentioned already that storm surge is the #1 cause of deaths in hurricanes. And so what is storm surge? Why do we take it so seriously? Well, it's water that's being pushed to shore by the strong winds of the hurricane. So as a hurricane is approaching the coast, the strong winds of the hurricane are pushing the water levels up. And so as the storm moves inland, that water also moves inland as well. And it's already at a much higher level. So think of it as a very, very high tide, a storm tide. That can, in the case of a major hurricane here in Broward County, could be 5, 6, 7, up to even 9 feet above the normal tide. So think about a tide that's about 7, 8 feet above normal. Then on top of that, you got waves. It's not just still water moving in, right? It's, turbulence, turbulent water, waves crashing on shore. That's what we're talking about with a storm surge. Back in 2005, we remember those really, awful images from New Orleans, and even with Hurricane Sandy in 2012, we saw a lot of the same type of images of just incredible flooding and all the devastation that occurred. So, could we see that type of flooding or flooding here in South Florida? Well, the answer is yes, and we already have seen that type of flooding. Maybe not in as large a scale, but it has occurred. And I'm going to give you a couple of, at least one local example. Yes, we have to go back a ways. But in 1947, we had a Category 4 hurricane that made a direct landfall right here in northern Broward County. In fact, I think the eye of the storm went right over Pompano Beach. Of course, it was 1947, so there were, the population here was, not even close to what it is today. But it was a Category 4. The wind, I think there are some unconfirmed or unofficial estimates that the winds could have been as high as 150 miles an hour here in this part of Broward County in that storm. The tides were estimated at 7 to 11 feet above normal along the Broward County coast. In fact, the reports were that A1A was washed out from here all the way up to the Palm Beach, so well into Palm Beach County from this storm. In fact, this is just a little bit of a sample. Really, the damage was much more than this, but think about it. Think about if this hurricane were to occur today, with today's population, today's infrastructure, everything else, everything that we have today. Obviously, the impact, the damage would be much, much worse. Now, could this hurricane happen again? It's happened before. You know, we are in an area that has been hit before by a major hurricane, so sure, it could happen again. Let's hope it doesn't happen again, but it can. That's why we have to be ready for it. So the evacuation zones here, of course, here in Broward County, there are two zones. There's Zone A and Zone B. Zone A is essentially the barrier island, east of the Intracoastal, and Zone B is the mainland, up as far west as Federal Highway. So that's in a very general sense, really, where the evacuation zones are. And those zones are based on storm surge models. In other words, we run models that show that we simulate, okay, if we have a Category 4 hurricane, for example, making a direct landfall in Broward County, how far inland, how deep would that storm surge be? So based on those models, the county has drawn up those zones. Now, storm surge is not always directly proportional to the category of the storm. In other words, it's not always a Category 3 hurricane is always going to cause the same amount of storm surge, Category 4, etc. Sometimes you could have a lower category storm that could, for many reasons, could produce a larger or a higher storm surge. And the opposite can also occur. So storm surge, again, is a big threat. And we have to take it, especially here in a coastal community, we have to take it very, very seriously. Wireless emergency alerts. So in other words, we talk a little bit about how we get the word out. How are we going to get the word out of storm surge warnings and all the other big warnings that we issue? These are the alerts that we sometimes get on your phones. You're probably not even aware you have this capability. Well, pretty much all the newer phones. For example, Amber alerts. The state will issue. Sometimes we'll get those. Your phone will go off, and you're not really sure. It's usually a different alert tone that you normally get for your other alerting tools. So this is a system that the government, federal, FEMA, and the FCC came together a few years ago, a way of alerting people that are in the area where the warnings is valid for. So it's not just weather messages that go out through the system, but there are weather messages that are included in there, such as tornado warnings, flood warnings, and also hurricane warnings, storm surge warnings, and extreme wind warnings, which extreme wind warnings are the warnings that we issue when a major hurricane is about to make landfall. It's kind of to give people a last chance to hunker down. So we wait until, let's say, for example, if the major hurricane force winds, 110 plus mile an hour winds, are about an hour away, we'll issue that warning for a more targeted area to let people know, okay, you're in this area, you're going to get major hurricane force winds in the next hour, hunker down. This is it. You shouldn't, everything, not should you be ready, but now this is the time to take cover. Okay, what are some other things that we're doing to try to help so people can better understand what they should be doing, or maybe what are the conditions that they should be preparing for? And on the National Weather Service websites, including the local Weather Service office here in South Florida, weather.gov/Miami, we're going to be posting these maps. Whenever we're under threat, a watch or a warning from a tropical system, we're going to be putting these maps that are going to help communicate what our threat is and what are the potential impacts that we could face with every new forecast that goes out. So when the Hurricane Center comes out with their forecast every 6 hours, and that information goes out to the community, we then will publish these maps that will give people an idea of what degree of preparation they should be taking based on what the potential impacts from each of our major hazards to the storm will be. And those hazards, of course, are wind. We talked about the water, the flooding from rainfall, the flooding from storm surge, and we also throw in tornadoes as well. So we assess the threat for each of those 4 hazards, and then we come up with these statements, or first of all, color or threat levels that indicate what level of threat you have and exactly what that means. So we have a graphical description and a text description, so you have an idea of what exactly that means. In other words, we just don't leave the color up there and let you guess what that color means. Well, we want to give you an idea of what it is that you should be preparing for. What is the potential impact? And again, and how do we come up with this? Well, we come up with this by using that reasonable worst case scenario philosophy. So we understand that our forecasts aren't perfect. Yes, a forecast for a given storm at a given time might be really, really good. I mean, it might be only a few miles off, but a few miles can make a big difference. And we're not that good yet. I don't know if we'll ever be that good, at least not in my lifetime, to forecast a storm down to the mile, 36 hours in advance. We have to consider that storms will take slightly different tracks than we forecast them to. And there's different scenarios that could occur that we have to consider. It's not just, okay, this is the forecast, this is what you prepare for. No, you have to consider there are different potential scenarios that could occur, that could unfold. And that's what these maps are trying to depict is what are those scenarios that could reasonably occur? And of course, we're going to err on the side of safety. So we're going to go with that reasonable worst case so that you don't get caught off guard when we depict this information on the website in this manner. Let's give you a little bit of an example. So we have a map there that's depicting the wind threat that was a point in time during Matthew, I forget which advisory it was. So anyway, when you click on the map, let's say you would click on, let's say, Pompano Beach, and that point there is pretty close to Pompano Beach. It represents Pompano Beach at least. And you see it says threat level high. So what that means is from the wind threat at this time was high, which means that there's the potential for extensive impact, which means there on the right-hand side, let's see, actually, look, yeah, you don't see the whole thing there, but there in that box there on the left, it actually it describes what is the potential impact. So it says something like considerable wind damage to sturdy buildings, some having roof failure, et cetera. So in other words, it gives you a picture, or at least an idea of why you should be preparing the way we're telling you to. And it builds in that it builds in a safety margin. Okay, so we're erring on the side of that safety margin, so it's a responsible measure of threat. We don't want to give you the absolute worst case scenario, because that's never going to, I shouldn't say never, very rarely going to occur. But the reasonable worst case scenario does have at least some chance that it could occur. If you ask the people with Hurricane Andrew down in Homestead, if they got the worst case scenario, they'll tell you yes. So unfortunately, the worst case scenario does happen to someone sometimes. So that's why we have to at least convey this message in the most responsible way possible. Now again, we can tweak this as the event gets closer and we have our confidence increases, we can then maybe narrow down that range of scenarios. We can start honing in a little bit more on what is going to happen. But sometimes that doesn't occur until we're really less than 12 hours away. At 36 hours away, it's really hard to do that. So anyway, this gives you just another picture there of the threat levels, what the threat levels correspond to, and then tying them directly to impacts. So that information will be available, and we also brief this information. When we give our briefings to emergency managers, we will show this information. So again, planners and emergency managers get an idea of exactly what we should be preparing for as a community. Okay, this is another one that we're going to start this year. This is it's still going to be considered experimental. It's not an official final product, if you will, but I think can have quite a bit of utility. And this is what we're calling the experimental time of arrival graphic. So what these maps are conveying, and I think the next slide might show it better. Yeah, what these maps are showing is what is the potential time of arrival of the tropical storm force winds. Why is that important? Well, tropical storm force wind, that onset or arrival of tropical storm force winds is the time that planners and emergency managers use as, okay, this is the time when everything has to end. All the preparations have to be finished, because that's when the conditions start getting too dangerous for people to be outside, doing work, putting up shutters, etc. So it's kind of like time zero, if you will, right? Is that kind of so? And this is one of the most frequent questions we get, and one of the things that we really try to hone down or get really close to is giving at least 2 or 3 days an idea of when will those winds begin. So these maps are going to be on, again, the Hurricane Center's website, hurricanes.gov, to get an idea. So we're going to give 2 different times here, okay? And this might get a little bit confusing, but it kind of goes off what I was talking about earlier. We're going to show one that indicates the earliest reasonable arrival time. Again, that reasonable word comes up again. So that is a timing, the one on the left is timing that has no more than a 10% chance of occurring. But so it's the most conservative, most risk-averse option. The one on the right is what we're calling the most likely arrival time. That one on the right is based on the actual forecast. If that forecast does not change or changes very, very little, that's going to be what's most likely to occur. So so that most likely time on the right is one that's equally likely to occur before or after that time. So if you have a very low risk or very low tolerance, for risk, if you need a lot of time to prepare, which one do you think you would use? The one on the left that gives you some margin for error, if you will, or the one on the right that's cutting it really, really close? I think most people would want to use, in that situation, would want to use the one on the left, the earliest reasonable time. If you're thinking about evacuating thousands of people, which one are you most likely to use? I think the one on the left, probably. But again, it's dependent on, there's a lot of other things that come into play here as well. But so this information will be out there for people to use. So if you can wait maybe until the last, I shouldn't say the last second, but if you can wait a little bit longer, if you have a higher tolerance for risk, then maybe you could wait until the map on the right, the timing that's indicated on the right one. But not everyone has that luxury, especially those of us that have to be at work during storms. How many of you have to put up your shutters 3-4 days before? Maybe 3 days before. I know I do. I have to at least think about it. Well, that's probably what I would be using myself, is the one on the left. Something else that we're going to be starting this year is we're not just going to wait for a storm to get a name or a number to start putting up warnings. Sometimes systems that are still in the early stages of development, especially if they're developing close to land, sometimes they can just strengthen or pop up really fast. And then within 24 hours, they're affecting our community. Well, we can't wait then to put up a warning. We can't wait until the storm gets an official name or number to put up a warning. So starting this year, we're going to have the ability to issue a tropical storm or hurricane watch or warning before a storm officially gets a name or a number. Again, we're doing that so that we can give people time to prepare. We had in Hurricane Katrina in 2005, when it affected South Florida, it didn't get a name until I think maybe 36 hours before it hit Florida. It wasn't one of those storms that had a name from 5-6 days before and we were tracking it for days and days. It only became a tropical storm just a few hundred miles east of us. So we didn't have a lot of time to prepare once it formed, and then the warnings went up really quickly. Well, this year, starting this year, we're going to have the ability to issue warnings when we have a high level of confidence that a developing storm is going to eventually become a tropical storm or a hurricane. So I think that's going to, again, give us more time, more preparedness time. So again, the graphics explain this in a little bit more detail. And they're going to carry the name potential tropical cyclone. So before it becomes a depression or a storm, they'll be, the Hurricane Center will put out the forecast like they normally do for any storm, but they're going to call it potential tropical cyclone 1. I know it kind of has a weird name, but I guess they couldn't think of anything else to call it. So it's going to have a potential tropical cyclone name, if you will, and then they'll be issued again only for systems that are threatening land within a watch warning time frame, again within 48 hours. Okay, we're getting close to wrapping up here. As we've done over the last few years, as we've all become more comfortable and more used to social media, we're using social media much more now to get the word out. So we're using Facebook and Twitter, but of course we're also using our website. It's not just, one, we want to make sure that people get directed to official sources of information. But certainly a lot of people get their information, for better or for worse, via social media. So, we have to, at least in the National Weather Service, we feel, okay, we need to be part of that, okay, by making sure that the official information is getting out there as well. Something the Hurricane Center started doing, and we followed suit, was with every advisory for a threatening or landfalling storm, they'll put some key messages up on their website, and that's really the main message or the main messages that we want people to take away from that storm at that point in time. Of course, also thinking or considering that it's going to change or could change as we get closer to the storm. So we do use our social media platforms, and those are right there. Of course, our website, weather.gov/South Florida. We have Facebook and Twitter, NWS Miami on both. Hurricane Center also has their own, the website, of course, hurricanes.gov, which is, again, complimentary with the Miami Forecast Office website. And they also have Facebook and Twitter accounts. So I'm just going to wrap up with, I think, what we all know, but we need to reinforce the message every single year. First of all, really, it's about being hurricane smart. This Weather Ready Nation initiative that we talked about earlier really boils down to being aware and being alert and being knowledgeable of our vulnerabilities to weather events. We need to stay abreast of official information. So that's information coming from the city, information coming from the county, from the local media, and the National Weather Service. We all work together. Kimberly mentioned it briefly, and I've mentioned it also here as well, that we communicate frequently during active or during hazardous weather events with briefings. We've sent email briefing packages out, and the media gets those too. So it's not just, we're not just all doing our own little thing independent of each other. We have to convey one consistent message, and the way we do that is by maintaining that contact, our core partnership between the media, the local officials, emergency managers at all levels of government, and the National Weather Service. Certainly, we want folks to heed evacuation orders. Okay? Meteorologists, we don't issue the evacuation orders. They're issued by county leadership based on information that we're providing. We coordinate, we provide information. We may not even recommend. Okay, we leave that information, we leave that decision to the local authorities. We talked about the evacuation zones, so everyone should know whether they live in an evacuation zone or not. If they live in an evacuation zone, well, that should be part of the plan. That should be part of everyone's hurricane plan, the plan we should be coming up with right now as we approach hurricane season. If you live in an evacuation zone, where are you going to spend the storm? Because you will be told to leave. If you don't live in an evacuation zone, well, plan to shelter in place. All the local officials will tell you that you don't have to evacuate hundreds of miles, just evacuate maybe tens of miles. Or if you don't live in an evacuation zone, shelter in place. Or if you don't want to stay in your house, certainly stay at a relative or friend's house, but you don't have to travel hundreds of miles. If you do decide to leave town, don't wait until the last minute, because that's what can happen. Now, that wasn't here in Florida. I think that was somewhere in Texas. But that was from a storm back about, 10 years ago or so. But that could easily happen here or anywhere when you get people that are evacuating mixed in with people who don't really have to evacuate, but they decide to leave anyway, and maybe they decide to leave they don't decide until maybe the last 12 hours that they want to leave town. You get total gridlock. So what's the worst case, what's like the nightmare scenario? Is a hurricane barreling into an area with cars stranded, stuck on the road. Hurricanes can strike any year here in South Florida, not a forecast active year, not a forecast inactive year, any year. And every storm needs to be taken seriously. Even tropical storms, they may not get the same hype or the same attention as major hurricanes. Tropical storms can still do a lot of damage. They can knock trees down, they'll knock power lines down, they will knock out power for many, many people. Tropical storms can be pretty nasty, not to mention the flooding we can get from tropical storms, from rainfall. Not every storm is the same. So in other words, don't rely on your past experience with storms to get you through that next one, because that next one's might be totally different. Every storm has its own unique character, its own unique series of events. Matthew would have been 30 miles farther west. It would have been totally different for us here. So just because maybe the next storm will take a forecast track similar to Matthew, don't think that the same thing's going to happen next time. Unfortunately, we might not be so lucky the next time. All right, I guess we're going to hold questions. So that's my presentation. I guess I'll pass it back over to Kimberly.
Yeah, keep hold of that. We might have some good
Okay.
questions. I'm glad we have some time for some questions. Number one, thank you so much, Rob.
Thank
Don't
you.
go anywhere yet. Thank you.
Thank you.
Really. Tremendous partner. And like you said, we start preparing when we start to see something out there and they start their conference calls. That's such a valuable tool to us. When I started in the city 10 years ago, we were using our own tools. We were using private sector software that was good, but it didn't necessarily mean we were all on the same page. And this allows us to really work with our partners and from the county, state, federal, so that we're all kind of getting the same messages, and I think that was really important. And also, Rob brought up a great note, employee planning. We talk about that all the time, but that is so critical to make sure that we're doing our stuff at home, because we have to come in, right, like Eddie said, we're the public safety, for the community. We're public servants. So with that job, that role comes that responsibility, and making sure our families are as prepared as possible before we need to either be there before the storm, during the storm, or after the storm. Everybody has a role. So I really appreciate that. And let's entertain any questions for Rob right now on weather related. They're the experts in this stuff now. Because it's great that we bring in the webinars.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens is I bring in our staff to observe those webinars. Once it gets closer, I'm like, okay, this could be something. This could be something that we're really going to have to take seriously. We're getting to that 10% conservative. Okay, what actions do we need to take, on our certain days out? And everybody has a plan, each department, and what actions they need to take at what point. So that's really valuable, and I commend the work that you do and the whole team there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
Actually, if I may add something, I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
So you were talking about being able to warnings up before you actually have names for the storm.
Right.
So going back to Hurricane Irene, which came in with a surprise off through the Gulf. Is that, I don't know if you know the scenario. I mean, we had it was it quickly formed, wasn't coming our way, then all of a sudden it came our way.
And then school buses were on the road.
Yeah. That.
Are you saying the technology to increase that much better, where you're going to be able to predict that scenario?
Well, yeah, the scenario that potential tropical cyclone watch warning refers to is a system that's still in the process of developing. In other words, it hasn't really become a full-blown depression or storm yet, but computer models and really our expertise, if you will, indicates that there's a high likelihood that it will spin up into a named storm with tropical storm or even hurricane force winds, and do so just offshore. In other words, if a tropical wave develops into a hurricane 2,000 miles from us, we have plenty of time to monitor that, and the forecast will be issued every 6 hours for days on end. Sometimes those storms don't form, don't decide to form, don't give us that much lead time, if you will. Sometimes storms could develop rather quickly right in our backyard, right on our doorstep sometimes. Those are the ones that we're talking about, like the Katrina scenario from 2005 that became a named storm 36 hours before it made landfall. So we went from nothing to a warning in that situation. Well, with this capability now, we have greater confidence or more tools available so that we can actually predict that scenario to happen. Not we wait for it to happen, but be more proactive and be able to issue those watches or warnings even for something that hasn't become a named storm yet. Now, and I think you're referring to Irene from 1999, correct?
Correct.
Now, that one was a named storm way down in the Caribbean. Now, that was a scenario where it was a relatively slight shift in the track to the right. And these shifts in tracks happen all the time. Okay, we have to keep that in mind. Not every storm is going to be as well behaved, if you will, as Matthew was. Some are going to be a little bit harder to forecast. So when we issue those warnings, when we put up these potential impact that depict reasonable worst case scenarios, we're thinking about scenarios like Irene and many others that sometimes will not follow or will not stay close to that skinny black line. Remember Max Mayfield, the former director of the Hurricane Center, always still says it actually. Don't follow the skinny black line. Because sometimes it's not going to follow that skinny black line. It's going to deviate. So I think there's really two different things that we're talking about, I think.
I bring that one up specifically because we had a storm earlier in the season. So we got everybody, the city released, everybody got to go home earlier. Now this is an October storm. Nobody got released and no one was prepared. And nobody shut us up because we went home at 5 o'clock in the top of the storm force wind. So when that shift, you're talking probably a 50-mile shift, which hit us at the time. So that's
Right.
my big concern. And also, I think we let our guard down because we spent so much money 6 weeks earlier with a storm that Category 5 that was offshore that never actually came.
Hurricane, you were talking about Floyd, yes.
Floyd.
That's correct. Yep.
And everybody got to go home for that. But unfortunately, the conservative view was it's not coming. We don't know it's coming.
Right.
And then all of a sudden it's
Right.
here.
Well, right, exactly. And that's where, over the years, this is 1999, over the years, since then, we've learned so much more. Of course, technology has improved. Our knowledge of storms has improved. Our forecast accuracy has improved, but it's still not perfect. So, you raised many, many good points. Number one is about complacency. Also, you made a point about, you referred to people not assuming, okay, well, we didn't get hit by that last one. This one's not going to be a big deal either. You got to take every storm individually.
Plus,
Yep.
everybody's thinking it was Category 1, and it really came across as more or less Category 2, and kind of inland flooding because it came from the other way, and it was slow. You got a tremendous amount of rain, so you had no storm surge, but we had flooding.
Right, rainfall flooding.
Flooding in Point, and
Right.
we had roads that were impassable.
Well, and I think that's what you'll see. We've learned a lot since then. So not only have the tools become enhanced and better to utilize and given us more information, it allows us then to take some of those worst case scenarios or reasonable worst case scenarios and implement them in our plans. And that's why it's so important to have the department plans, but then we also, from the level of evacuating, when do we close? A lot of those decisions, protective measures that we need to take as a city, that's why that's so important. They become an important partner, and then we try to get ahead of that, if at all possible. Obviously, last year we had 2 tornadoes, a train derailment, and a plane crash, and the near miss with Hurricane Matthew. So, we just don't know. Last year was a busy year, and hopefully this year will not be a busy year, but, we plan the same. So, I'd like to, and any of the other speakers that you wanted to ask a question, we have just a couple more minutes. If anybody has a question? No, they're quiet. Does anyone ever have any other notes? No? All right, well then I want to say thank you for your time. Thank you for the speakers, everyone. I really appreciate it. And let us know if there's anything else. Thank you. Linda has your sign.